So here is the PG admin interface of postgreSQL, and what we want to do is to create a database. So on the database tab, I will right click to create a database. So let's give a name to our database. Let's name it as J.T Hospital database and then save it. And if you take a look here, you'll see that um, the database J.T Hospital has been created. So now the J.T Hospital database has been created. So on this database, let's go to the schema tab and right click. You will see the query tool. On the query tool, you click on the query tool. So on this query tool, we can write our SQL queries to create the tables for this database, like so. So basically, in our database, we will have a table which holds information about doctors, and another table which holds information about the nurses, and one which holds information about the patients. So we will start by creating or by writing the code drop table if exists doctor, drop table if exists nurse, drop table if exists patient. Now this is done to avoid the table already exists error if any of this table had already been created in the database, and this is a good practice. Okay, so let's create a table named doctor, like so. So the syntax to create a table is we use the keyword create table and provide the name of that table. In this case, the name of our table is doctor, and then we define the different attributes of the table, like so. So I've written the code, and I'm going to explain what it does so we can save some time. So for the table doctor, we use the keyword create table and provide the name of that table, and the next thing we do is we define the attributes of the table. So the following attributes were defined: the doctor's ID, and the data type for the doctor's ID was numeric, and it was not null. It's the primary key. Not null here means that we must provide a value for that attribute, so it cannot be empty. We also had the doctor's first name. It was a varying character. It's not null. The doctor's last name. It was a varying character. It's not null. And the varying characters here were restricted to 30 characters. We had the doctor's age, and the data type here is a small integer and it's not null. We had the doctor's specialty. It's a varying character with the characters restricted to 30, and it was not null. We also had the doctor's salary. The data type 2 here was a varying character, and it was not null. So that's how you create a table and define its attributes. So after creating the tables and defining its attributes, the next thing we might want to do is to now insert values into this table. And the syntax for this is insert into doctor the values we want to insert. So I've written the code and I'm going to explain what the code is actually doing. So for the table doctor, we want to insert the following values. So let's insert a doctor with a doctor's ID of 0, 1, 2, 3, and let's say the first name of that doctor is Daniel, and the last name of the doctor is Abia, and the doctor is 33, and let's say the specialty of the doctor is surgeon, and the doctor earns 4,000 euros. Let's insert another doctor and give it a doctor's ID of 0124. Let's say the first name of that doctor is Jesse. The last name of the doctor is Fengwei. The age is 34. The specialty is dermatologist, and the salary is 5,000 euros. Let's insert another doctor. Let's say we give the doctor the a doctor's ID of 0125, and the first name of that doctor could be Rachel. The last name could be Chang. Let's say the age of the doctor is 29. The doctor is a dentist, and the salary for that doctor is 7,000 euros. So that's how you insert values into a table. So we can insert as many values as we have into our table. So we can follow the same procedure to create the nurse table and insert values into that table, like so. So we use the same syntax, such as create table nurse, and then insert the different all, and then define the different attributes of that table, such as the nurse ID right up to the nurse salary. And the only difference when we compare this table to the doctor's table is that is the position that we place the primary key. For this table, you'll see that there are two primary keys, the nurse ID and the doctor's ID. If you watch the video of when we're developing the schema for this database, you will have a better comprehension of this. So how do we now insert values into this table? So we will follow the same procedure. The keyword is insert into nurse the values we want to insert, and let's say we want to insert the first nurse, and we give the nurse the ID 541, and let's say the first name of that nurse is Jessica, and the last name is Archer, and the age is 28, and the salary is 3,800 euros. And we could also insert another nurse. The ID of that nurse could be 542, and the first name could be Brenda, and the last name could be Chang, and the salary and the age could be 27, and the salary could be 3,750 euros. And we could also insert another nurse with a nurse ID of 543. Let's say the first name of that nurse is Blessing, and the last name of that nurse is Injaka, and let's say the nurse is 27, and she earns 3,500 euros. So that's how you insert values into this nurse table, just as we did for the doctor's table. Okay, so we can apply the same procedure to create the patient's table and also insert values into that table, like so. So we will use the same keyword as create table, and we give the name to the table. In this case, the name is patient, and we define the different attributes of that table, from a patient ID right up to the patient's telephone number. Okay, and another difference here is the position of the primary key, and the patient's table has three primary keys: the patient's ID, the doctor's ID, and the nurse ID. Okay, if you go back to the video on how we develop the schema for this database, you will see how we discussed the importance of the foreign key and how they help us to link one table to another. So to insert values into the patients table, we follow the same procedure, like insert into patients the following values. And if we are inserting a patient, let's say we give that patient a patient ID of 0 to 1, and let's say the first name of that patient is Linda, and the last name of the patient is Yambe, and that patient is 47 years old, and the patient lives at hospital round about 12, and that's the postcode in Bamenda, and the patient's telephone number is this. So we can follow the same procedure to provide the following values to that patient's table. Okay. So after creating the database and creating the tables and inserting values into each, let's now write some select SQL query to explore our database and see the different attributes and the data that was inserted into these tables, like so. So for the doctor's table, if we want to output everything from that table, we can write the query select star from, we define the table doctor, and if we run that program, you'll see that we are going to get the doctor's table with all the attributes that were defined and all the data that was inserted onto this table. So from this table we can write more SQL queries to extract any data that we want to get from this table. And we can do the same thing for the next table, and if I run this, you see that we have a table, or the next table, with all its attributes defined and all the data that was inserted into this table. The same thing for the patient's table. So if I run this code, you'll see that we will get the patient's table with all the attributes defined from the patient's ID right up to a patient's telephone number and all the data that was inserted into the patient's table. And we can now write different SQL queries to extract any data that we want to get from the patient's table. Okay, so in the next lecture we are going to explore more of the SQL queries and see how we can use them to manipulate the data that was stored within our J.T Hospital relational database.